Well, hello, everyone. It is Friday afternoon out here on the West Coast, Friday evening, early Friday evening over there on the East Coast, late Friday over there in Europe and the UK, and it might even be Saturday if you're on the other side of the world. But wherever you are, it's time for Cinema Crusaders. That's right. It's the show where we go back and we look at older movies, we examine them, we reevaluate them, and we hope that we reintroduce them to you, the audience, so you can check them out. We're always picking movies we think that are interesting, exciting, provide something new, something to talk about, look at, and look at the history of cinema and maybe visit a different time or even just a good movie that you may have forgotten about or may have not seen. So, with that, this week we are going to be talking about a movie that I was not familiar with. It was recommended to us by one of the Cinema Crusaders, Jeff Bracey, who is on with us today. It is Slipstream from 1989. Slipstream stars Mark Hamill, Bill Paxton, F. Murray Abraham, and many, many others. Robbie Coltrane has a cameo appearance in it. Just a whole host of people. And it's a really interesting movie. Can't wait to get into it. But before we do, I need to introduce those intrepid crusaders who are always with me to talk about various films. And I'm going to introduce first a man who is a writing legend. He writes for Blitz. He writes Blitz for Revelation Comics. He also writes for Omen Comics. He's doing some writing for me for Raincross Press. He's a good friend. And I also want to give a shout out, a memorial. He had a recent loss in his life, so condolences to him as well. We are so grateful he's with us today, though. Thank you very much, and welcome back to Steve Shadewing Sellers. How you doing, Steve?
Well, thanks a whole lot for the kind words. This was a movie that I hadn't really seen before, to be honest. Hadn't even really heard of it. But you can tell that this is Mark Hamill coming out of Return of the Jedi saying, I don't want to be typecast, because it's like he was looking for the exact opposite thing to do, which he eventually did with the Joker. But this seems to be like a similar kind. He was in that phase. But I will say, this is the only movie I can think of where a Jedi kills a wizard. So, good for them on that.
I have to also say this felt like his audition to be in the Wing Commander series, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, as well, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then I want to bring on, first I'm going to mention that Lance is off doing Warehouse 9 things. He was in a meeting today and he couldn't make it back in time, but we wanted him to stay safe and want to thank him and hope that we will catch up with him next time. But we are always miss Lance. And with that, I want to bring on the Crusader who recommended this film to us. I'd never even heard of it, which is amazing to me. And I can't wait to talk to him about it. He is an artist and a writer. He's done Symbols of Liberty and Mr. Happy. He's also working on Fellhand for Raincross Press and a whole host of other things. He's a man who is constantly busy doing all sorts of stuff, got his hands in different pies. He is the multi-talented Jeff Bracey. How you doing, Jeff?
Oh, great. Hello out there. This is a movie I discovered in the wonderful 80s period of the new fashion of the VHS video store. It was a small budget independent movie produced by what's his name, Gary Kurtz, who produced films with George Lucas, American Graffiti, Star Wars. He's produced other films of note, genre pictures. It was directed by the guy who directed Tron for Disney. So and as you mentioned him, it's got a tremendous cred as far as actors. So they were able to pull together like a bunch of really terrific actors for this essentially, low budget project. And it immediately struck a chord with me seeing Mark Hamill play a villain. And I thought a very interesting villain because he's a completely ruthless character, but he has his own interesting morality coupled with religion. And all the characters for me, have pretty interesting arcs in a lot of ways. It's a sci-fi adventure. It's post-apocalyptic, but it's also incredibly philosophical at the same time. And they managed to pull this off on a shoestring of a budget, in my opinion. Really well done.
Yeah, it definitely has that independent look to it.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to get into that, because I think that there are some good and some bad to having that look to it,
Mm-hmm.
The first thing I really wanted to hit on, though, because it stood out to me. And once again, I enjoyed the film, but I think there's some good and there's some bad in it. And I'm going to go to Jeff first, and then go to Steve second, and then I'll wrap up with my thoughts. But I want to hear what you thought of the writing, the overall storytelling in the film. I will preface that by saying I think there's some really cool, strong points to how they told the story, but I think there's some weaknesses as well, and I'm not sure where to attribute those. And that's kind of why I wanted to lead off talking a little bit about it. So, Jeff first, though, what did you think about the writing, storytelling in the film?
I think there is definitely a pacing issue that happens within the film, and the copy that we got to watch, it's not tracking with my memory because I haven't watched this film in a very long time. But there are scenes that jump, and I'm like, there's supposed to be a scene in there that fills this out more. So I don't know what was up with this particular copy, but for those of you who haven't seen it before, when you're going like, what, they were talking about a balloon shop, like, yeah, and you see the drawing in the ground, there is a scene that fills that in. There are scenes that show how Bill Paxton gets incapacitated, and like there's deeper story elements that for me, as somebody who had seen the film the year it came out, are sadly missed because they do add some extra context and some development. But even with that, this wasn't meant to be Star Wars. This is a little bit more of a Blade Runner. So it's a thinking piece of sci-fi without being. It's trying to be as deep, but not quite as deep. There's definitely some relevance there as you think about, like, you know, what makes a man, what makes a soul, what makes us alive. And sometimes I wonder if Gene Roddenberry might have seen this film and go like, inspiration for Lieutenant Commander Data one day, because Byron's character plays out very much like this in a lot of ways, just in a very condensed form. And so, yeah, I do see there's a tremendous amount of strengths, but you know, there's, like I said, there's that pacing issue. I think the film could have actually benefited from being a little bit longer to fill in some of these gaps, or maybe tighten up these scenes a bit and be willing to trim a little bit more of the fat to make things more concise.
Okay, I could see that. Steve, building on what Jeff said, what do you think about not only the pacing issues, but what did you think about the storytelling, the writing in the film?
Yeah, before I get into that, I found out that there was a restored version of this movie. It's listed on Amazon, I believe. You just have to kind of look for it. But it is paced. So
yes,
I think
indeed.
that is, yeah, and I agree with Mike on that. Beyond that, I will talk about the pacing issues I agree with as well. Honestly, I thought that the movie really was not well edited, or at least not as well as it should have been. There are a lot of very jumpy kind of cuts, and it's very noticeable.
Again, I think that has to deal with like missing scenes, because if those scenes were in there, I don't think you would have noticed that quite so much. It's not nearly so.
I have to say, I was going to say maybe the restored version of the movie fixes those issues. If it's it's possible we could get much better film out of it, and maybe those things aren't as noticeable. But I mean, in this version that we saw, I mean, it's definitely a bit jump cutty. It definitely kind of feels like it shifts from one thing to another, without a very clear transition to it. There are scenes that feel like they're a bit longer than they should be. Others that feel like they're, way too abruptly short. And so I have to say that a lot of that has to be with the editing of the film, at least of this version of the film. And, hopefully that it was improved in the restored version. But in terms of the overall story itself, it took a while for me to grow on it. At first, it's sort of like, okay, you think Mark Hamill's the good guy because, he's the one who's the marquee actor. No, it's Bill Paxton. And normally I think of Bill Paxton as the guy that, plays these lovable jerks. And he does in this movie, but he's the main jerk who's the hero of the story. And I kind of like that.
Yeah, he's Chet in an ultralight in this movie. So
yeah.
He really is.
Yeah, he's somewhere between, like you said, Chet and Han Solo, because he just come off of doing weird science before this film.
Yeah. So that kind of shows. And and I really like the Byron character. The more I kind of learned about him, at first it was like I don't really like anybody at first, but then you kind of find out but then there's this Byron character who seems pretty cool, and he does, he seems like a likable character, and you kind of wonder why they're after him. Okay, he's keeping a secret. What is it? And then you find out what the secret is, and it's like, oh, okay. So I totally get this guy now. And then you start liking the character, and then as Paxton's character grows and changes, you learn to like him, because he stops thinking, only of himself, and starts forming an attachment to Byron, and which eventually becomes a very strong friendship towards the end. So I kind of like that aspect. It takes a while for it to get there. It goes through a lot of little misadventures along the way. And, you're kind of sitting there waiting to see, like, okay, what's the point of all this and where's it coming together? Eventually it does kind of get there, but it does take some work and some patience in order to get to that point.
I'll actually say, for my take, one of the best things that they did in terms of writing was the slow burn of finding out what Byron's whole deal was.
Yeah.
Because they didn't rush it. They didn't it wasn't like this dun 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 move it.
Yeah.
You got little clues, little hints, little clues, little hints.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the time you get to reveal, it's like, oh. So it's a great
because at first I was like, this guy's Diet Basil Rathbone.
Mm-hmm.
That was my first impression. He was Diet Basil Rathbone. He kind of reminded me of him. And then you kind of find out why that is. It's because he's a robot.
For those who haven't seen this movie, you'll have seen this actor. What's his name here? Bob Peck.
Yeah.
You'll remember him most as an American viewer as Muldoon, the groundskeeper or the animal handler in the first Jurassic Park movie. Clever girl.
Yes.
I will say, though, he could make a very good Sherlock Holmes or a good Doctor Who. I'm just based on what I've seen in this movie.
Definitely.
Mike says, does that mean you want to punch him?
No.
Because you want to punch him at any point. No, because you wouldn't be able to do any damage to him anyway. So even if you wanted to punch him.
The one you want to punch is Claude Rains in Robin Hood. That's the person in my
I will say that Bill Paxton, when you say he was thinking of himself, most of the time he was thinking with a specific part of himself for most of the movie, and we'll just leave it at that. So, I'm gonna be a little bit more negative. I want to do the positives first, though. I think the concept is really good. I do like the slow burn on the reveal on the Byron character quite a bit. I like the whole, the concept. Well, I like their overarching concepts, their world building concepts. I enjoyed those.
It's a very unique post-apocalyptic world.
Yeah. I enjoyed that this movie was kind of like the run for the border buddy cop. Not buddy cop, but buddy movie. That's basically the story arc we're taking here.
Well, the villains are buddy cops.
Yeah. So we got that going on. The problem I have with the movie is that, or not with the movie, it's with the storytelling, is that I think there's a lot of missed opportunities to flesh out the world and bring your viewer into the world. There was so much that I think was either left on the cutting room floor, maybe, or that was just left on the script that wasn't explored, because they've obviously come up with this whole concept, this post-apocalyptic world, and there's all sorts of elements and groups going on. And so I think that they not only did their story a disfavor by not fleshing that out more, and it didn't have to be all up front in a monologue. It could have been also over the course of the story. Not only did that, I think that they did a disservice to their characters as well, because I would have liked more reveal on the motivations and backstories of several of these characters. I think Bill Paxton's character was fine just the way he is. He's a rogue. We understood it. We didn't need to know more about him. But I would love to know why Mark Hamill's character is the way he is. What is his deal? I would have loved to know more about Byron. I would have loved to get some insight into this dream that he had. And I also love that they referenced the Philip K. Dick story in the writing, which is Two Androids Dream of Electric Sheep in the movie. That was great.
I actually want to get into more of the Byron character when we get into themes and stuff.
Yeah. So, there was a lot of cool stuff there. I just think there was a lot of opportunities missed or opportunities wasted. And
I think in this case, this might come down to budget. And because this guy, Kurtz, had produced Star Wars with Lucas, which dropped you into the middle of a story, because that's the way Lucas wrote Star Wars. That's what this feels like. You've just been dropped in this world, and get what you can out of it as you're going. We're really focusing on these characters. We're we're getting Bill Paxton's point of view of the world throughout most of the film.
But do you think my criticism is fair, or do you think
I do think it's fair. I would like to know a lot more about the world, about the ecology or the environment that sprung up, the ecological and technological disasters that led to the world having this worldwide variation. I mean, we do have slipstreams in our air, but now we've got this slipstream that is like really low to the ground, and there are really neat hints of the world building here. Like everybody who travels uses the ultralight craft that you ride on the wind. You basically sail on the wind, so you don't have to use much juice most of the time. And the more daring use balloons, or those who don't have enough. So there's hints of how this world is, but you do have to look for it. You do have to pay a lot more attention than you would.
I would like to know how it became like that. Like, what would it take to create a wind system like that?
I mean, literally.
I honestly thought that my take was I ponder that, being a world builder, and I was wondering if they did something that somehow set the Earth spinning a little faster.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but they talk about the convergence. They give you a 2-minute blurb at the beginning that just says there were ecological disasters brought on by technology.
Never tell you what.
And everything, but they don't tell you why. But then right at the end, I mean, this was one of the things that frustrated me. There's a scene at the end, and I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but where it's revealed that the android character is the technology that brought about this convergence. So it's like, oh, wait a minute.
Or at least he represents it.
It represents it. So it's like, that's a big reveal. You can't leave that softball hanging out there for me. Give me something, put a little meat on those bones. And so that's why I was a little frustrated.
I want to know more about who he killed and why.
Yeah, because at that point,
I don't know who, but I do know why.
Yeah, but they had done
my guess was that it was his master, but that's a guess.
Yeah, but they had done all the heavy lifting. They had brought me into the story and made me care about the characters and care about the world. Mm-hmm. And then when I was asking more as a viewer, they didn't give me more. So that's the frustrating part. Does it mean it's not an enjoyable movie? Absolutely not. I still enjoyed it, but it's like, I wish that there had been more on there. And I think your point is probably right. It probably was a budget thing, or this was a small project where they didn't have a ton of time to just keep doing it, especially with, the actors that they had on it. We're going to go to actors in a second. In fact,
those guys, so many of those guys must have worked for scale like this movie, because so much of the budget. Yeah, so much of the budget must have gone to those guys.
Yeah. I mean, the smallest name actor in this movie is Robbie Coltrane at the time. That's the smallest one. F. Murray Abraham is coming off Amadeus. Mark Hamill.
Kingsley from Gandhi.
Krishna Bamji.
Yep. Let's see. Mark Hamill is coming off all the Star Wars movies. I mean, we're talking about some serious star power that would have commanded millions of dollars. So I think you're absolutely right. So that begs the question, and I'm going to go to Steve first. For me, seeing all those people automatically lended this movie some credibility, because it was obviously a project that they believed in, which makes me even a little bit more frustrated, because I think there was meat left on the bones, obviously, and they probably felt the same way, but time constraints and everything else. But what did you think about the various Bill Paxton is in it as well. I forgot him. But all of the various actors in the film, specifically, let's go to the smaller roles first. So Ben Kingsley, F. Murray Abraham, Robbie Coltrane, anyone else that you want to mention that made, let's call them cameo appearances. They're not, all of them aren't technically cameo appearances, but how did you think they added into the film itself?
The thing is that all of these are legendary actors to one extent or another. At the time, Robbie Coltrane, and I will say Robbie Coltrane was the one that most jumped off to me. Just because it's like, okay, that guy's Hagrid. You kind of think of him as that now, but he wasn't back then. But even then, he was in stuff like Blackadder. So
not only that,
Yeah.
A year after this movie, he appears and had several roles in James Bond films. So
yes, he did. Yes, he did.
Yep.
Yeah, Mike and I actually talked about them over on Omen Revelation podcast, if you're curious. But and the thing is like, he walks on, he does his thing, and he's killed by Mark Hamill, and it's just, it's like, okay, you kind of expect that he would last longer, because he is such a name actor now, and
But this
actually
was
was
back then.
even
Yeah.
back then he was decently a name. Certainly in Britain he was a big name.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't expect him to see him go like that quickly, but at the same, so that actually adds to the surprise, knowing who he is, because you expect more out of his character. It's like, why would you get Bobby Coltrane and just have him die like that? So
And
I
the
think
thing was,
that was actually clever.
this was definitely a film made for American audiences, but it was, the soundstage stuff was shot in Pinewood Studios because Kurtz probably had like good associations with the people there after doing Star Wars.
And and that's also where they filmed the James Bond movies. So
Yes.
again,
There you
going
go.
back to Coltrane and James
Yeah.
Bond. So
Well,
yeah,
it was the same thing with me for F. Murray Abraham. So it's like all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he pops up and he's in like 2 scenes, and that's it, you know.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Good Lord, this guy is just," F. Murray Abraham is one of my favorites, And then he popped in
he's
and
great in
popped out.
Amadeus. It's a classic.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, well, I also love that they play on, Amadeus in, whatever you think of Last Action Hero. I think those scenes in Last Action Hero with them are hilarious.
And Khonshu in Moon Knight. I mean,
Yes.
whatever you might think of that show, he was
Yeah.
great in it.
Yeah. So, Jeff, what did you think about the name actors who put in spot performances? I think that's the best way.
I tell you, I love seeing this kind of stuff. I love seeing a guy who's reached that Oscar-winning, that Oscar-winning mega status, and if they find something they like, they will step down. They will supplement their pay. They're like, this is a good script, this is a good part, I want to do it. And I love that. And it's either that or sometimes it's like, I've heard Samuel L. Jackson, since Mike brought it up, sometimes it's just favors for a friend, like, a director or a writer, and he would like you, like, oh, okay, yeah, you're my buddy, I'll step in and do this little thing. So whatever the circumstance, it really does bring the level up, because Bill Paxton was not a big name at the time. Mark Hamill obviously was well known, but like you said, he's trying to break his typecast before his typecast happens, because he's just done Star Wars and he's played the protagonist in Corvette Summer as well. So he's looking to shift gears and not be the hero. And he plays an excellent villain, and we had no idea how great a villain this guy could play. Between this, the Joker, and Sick Girl, if you get a chance to see that, one of his more recent films.
The Trickster on the Flash show as well.
The Trickster, yes, indeed.
And don't forget Cockknocker. That is a very important
dude, too good. Well, that's an interesting story. Wham! But this I love seeing that, because it does add this level of gravitas. It elevates things. It adds this level of authenticity that these power players think enough of the material or the characters to want a piece of this. And it's like I said, again, it's a low budget movie. They did a lot with what they had, but there are times you're like, oh, they're using radio controlled airplanes. They're using like little models and things like that. So it's not a big budget thing, but for a movie of its day, I think they stretch the budget as much as they can. And I remember like one of the other producers, or maybe it was Kurtz said like, I don't want to spend money on anything that's not actually going to be in front of the camera. And that's a very wise decision. There's not this extravagance going on. So like, if you're going to put your money to good use and you can get Oscar worthy actors, spend the money there. Like everything else, like the little tricks they do, like not actually showing plane crashes sometimes. There's a scene where they crash and they do it all from inside the cockpit and they show the aftermath. That's a great way of dealing with things if you don't have the money. So I appreciate the fact that they got these A-list guys and gals in here to do the work, because it just makes everything so much better when you have this level of talent on a production.
And yet I will say this. I was impressed with the fact that all of the other actors and actresses who play around the main characters and then the stars who are playing bit parts put in good performances, and they didn't look out of place. I reviewed a movie several years ago, a horror movie, and it had Lori Petty and Corbin Benson in it, and their acting ability was so far and above everybody else's it was off-putting.
That
you
is
know?
so noticeable. That is so noticeable. Like when you've got somebody who's just basically out of acting school, and you put some like ringer in there, and you're like,
Yeah,
can we have more of this guy?
yeah, yeah. And it
You can
was nothing
tell
that,
when like some actors are in it for a paycheck, and you have that one guy who's like, no, I'm going to make this a real role. I'm going to do what I can with this bad movie,
yeah.
and it just becomes very noticeable where you have this one guy who is stealing the movie, and everybody else is just kind of wooden and
That's absolutely one of my favorite things about watching like Ron Perlman or Thomas Jane. It doesn't matter how low budget the
Nick
film
Cage.
is. They just go for it. I
Yeah.
love the fact that they just go for it. They do the work.
But I have to say, it was noticeable in this movie, seeing all of these. It's obviously a low budget film with these big name actors, but it's like the rest of the cast, the rest of the ensemble, really held their own.
Yeah.
And I was impressed with that. That was one of the strengths of the film. Now let's go on to the four main characters, and you can pick whoever you want to talk about. If you want, you can pick all of them to talk about. But they are Peck as Byron. Bill Paxton's character, whose name eludes me
Matt.
right off the sec. Mark Hamill's character. Let's look and see what he
Tasker.
was called. Tasker. And then Kitty Aldridge playing Belitsky. I'm going to talk real quick about Kitty Aldridge because of the four main characters in the story, she is the least known. She was primarily a TV actress in her time. I thought she did really well in the role. And I'm surprised that she didn't get more movie roles. Maybe she didn't want them. Maybe she was happy with a TV career. But I thought that she worked really well. I thought that her playing off of Mark Hamill and then Bill Paxton was really, really good.
She had great chemistry.
She really did.
Yes.
And
you
she
could
was a
definitely tell that there was something between her and Paxton the whole time.
Yeah.
And it's just the back and forth of it.
And she was a great foil for Mark Hamill to the point where you could feel the tension building between the two of them. And I thought it was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful. So I wanted to give a special shout out and spend my time in this segment talking about her because I thought that she was one of those very surprising bright star moments. And I wish that she had had a bigger career. But like we said, we don't know what her circumstances were. Maybe she had the career she wanted. Who knows? So with that, I'm going to go to Jeff next. Out of those four actors, who do you want to talk about? What do you want to talk about with their performances?
Oh boy, that's so tough because there's.
Out of the
I really like what Mark Hamill was doing, but I think maybe it's because I already knew who Mark Hamill was by this point, but Bob Peck is Byron.
Yeah.
Was so fascinating to me that there are these times when you see an actor for the first time and you know nothing about them, but you immediately become so intrigued by them. You notice them whenever they pop up on a screen. So like as soon as he popped up in Jurassic Park, I noticed. As soon as he popped up at the end, I mean literally the very end of Lord of the Flies as one of the army officers who rescues the kids, like, oh, it's the guy from Slipstream. Like sometimes people just resonate with you right away. And his performance just fired off my imagination and it kept me going because this really feels like I mentioned Lieutenant Commander Data, but it's Asimov. This guy embodies Asimov in a way that they tried to do with the Will Smith movie.
iRobot.
Yeah. Because the theme is the same. There's a robot who kills its master because its master asks him to.
Yeah. I think you're really onto something with the data.
I got that feeling too, that it was an assisted suicide.
Yeah, I mean, there's all these little clues. Bill Paxton's like, when he starts becoming his friend, he's like, oh, he's like, well, kid's like, yeah, well, he was asking for it, wasn't he? He goes like, oh, yes. So, he legitimately asked for it. That he was built to serve, and he served in a way that went completely against his programming, but he's already got this growth. And the idea, like, what was one of the big things about Data was when Data started dreaming, they kept upgrading him along the way. So I really feel like a lot of these ideas for Data got cribbed from this. that he learned how to go to sleep. He learned how to dream,
Well,
and this machine appears to be dreaming of heaven. He's quoting Byron, he's quoting Shelley, he's quoting the Bible. There's a lot of really interesting religious elements in here. And the first time we see him, he's actually reaching out to the heavens for salvation. Even though once he's caught, he does not fight back. He just like, okay, this is my fate. But until he's caught, he does struggle for his freedom. But once he's caught, he reverts to that android programming of service. I am to serve by being taken in for justice. And I love seeing the development of this character. And the best scene that he has, like all these wonderful moments he has as an android, where he's so matter of factual, but he's got a little bit of an interesting sense of humor at the same time. That wry, dry British wit that works so well here. But when he sleeps and when he dreams, he is so confused and jubilant because now he's like, I'm like a man and I don't know if I can handle it. And Mark Hamill has this great assessment of him. It's like, we seek to be perfect, but we can only be men. He seeks to be a man, but he has to deal with being perfect.
yeah.
And that really just the whole of that character and their struggles between each other is in there. And he, when he claims he's too dangerous to be a man, I knew what Bill Paxton was going to say before he said it. And it's like, no, you're not.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I do have to say, I also think not only is the way the character written and portrayed, but the performance from the actor, I think probably, if I had to guess, had some influence on, why am I blanking on the guy who played Data? So
Oh, Brent Spiner.
Brent
Brent
Spiner,
Spiner.
because he plays the android with emotionless emotion and artificial humanity. So it's really impressive what he does with it. I will say one other thing before I go to Steve. The character of Mark Hamill at the end had me questioning some things, and it never came to anything. But right at the end, before that character buys it, he reaches out his hand and says something that made me wonder: is he an android?
I would
To be
like to get
perfectly
into that when Steve gets through with his thing.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go to Steve first, and then let's talk about that, because there were some interesting questions I had at the end there. So, Steve, what did you think about those four main characters?
I'm pretty much in agreement on the most interesting thing in this movie, really, for me. Which is interesting that all the really great actors that are in this, and you're drawn to this character with this actor is like, who the hell is this guy? And yeah, he's just so compelling in this role, and you know more about one more and Hillman, British Reserve, and all that, but you eventually start to see that he does have more. I wouldn't say sanity exactly, but more of an emotional side, and especially once he starts getting a relationship with that woman, in that place that they, ended at.
Ariel in the museum.
Yeah, Ariel. Yeah. And so, yeah, that's really when you start really starting to see him change and really to see, his relationship with the Bill Paxton character change. And that's just really, really fascinating. But to kind of, and I will also add one other thing, and that is that it seems like they kind of developed a little bit out of Frankenstein, or at least, the original Mary Shelley version.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of saying that because she's, he's being portrayed as a monster, but he's not really a monster. They think he is. And really he acts the way he does because he has been rejected. He has been, treated as a monster by humanity, the people who built him. And so because of that, he's a fugitive, but the entire time, he's interested in other people. He's, trying to help other people. And really the situations that turn bloody and violent are because of other people, kind of interfering with that, most notably Tasker. So I'll kind of transition to him. Before we start getting into the whole thing with whether he's a robot or not, I just thought that Mark Hamill, it's basically Mark Hamill trying to be Boba Fett, but it's not. Like, the role in the story is that he's Boba Fett.
I actually took him as Mark Hamill as Judge Dredd myself.
Ooh.
Yes, that as well. Because he's somebody who is going to catch his prey, no matter what. He's very much in the lawful neutral type of thinking where, it doesn't really matter, why I'm after you. I have a job to do and I'll do it, whatever it takes. But at the
I
same
will
time, it's
say
also
that
interesting. Mhm.
I will say for me, I went back in time for the character he reminded me of. I thought this was Mark Hamill playing Javert. So
Yeah,
yeah,
there's that too. There's that too. There's definitely that moment, but it's definitely the idea of the lawman that doesn't serve justice. It's the letter law as opposed to the spirit of the law. And but the interesting thing of that as well is that he's driven by this faith that is really really interesting. I think adding the fact that he is very religious and he sees signs and all and everything. Even towards the end, I think that adds a lot, to that archetype and to that character, and the way Hamill plays it is very nuanced and very strong. And you start to this movie, I think, is probably where you start to see the Mark Hamill we start to see in later years, where he starts playing these very dark but also very complicated characters, like Joker, like Trickster, all these other sort of like.
Can I give you a piece of context, Steve?
Yeah.
Mark Hamill said he based a lot of this character off of a highway patrolman that pulled him over, and the fact that Mark Hamill is rather afraid of the police. And he said the swagger that this guy had, like I am the law kind of swagger,
I am the
stuck
law
with him. And it's like you said, he's got this bizarre morality where like he's completely driven to do his job, and then you like, well, he's religious. I mean, he gives everybody a Christian burial. He takes the time to do that instead of leaving them to rot. But then he also says, like, the more of these scumbags we put under rocks, the better. So, like, this guy is all over the place moralistically.
Yeah.
Well, I will say, for me personally, watching this, and let's get into talking about the character and our theories about him real quick. But right off the bat, I will say his whole concept of being, even associated as a law enforcement of some time, my bullshit meter was going off on that. I didn't buy it. By the end, I was like, this guy is doing whatever the hell he wants. I began to doubt that he's associated with anybody. I think
we never see any sign of the organization he works for. Nobody checks on him. He never checks on anybody.
He flips up a badge. That's all he's got.
Yeah. He flips up a badge. I mean, we never really even see the badge, really. So I have no idea, if he's just doing, what he's doing because he's doing it. My question is, why? What does it serve?
And, there's another point, real quick, and then I'll go to you, Jeff. He's filling out reports, and Belitsky says there's no use filling out the reports. Nobody reads them. He's like, they're important. They're important. I think it's bullshit. It's all bullshit. He thinks he's still part of some organization that probably doesn't even exist.
Back to Judge Dredd, he reminds me of the judges who go out to tame the wastelands. That he's still doing this, even though it doesn't matter. Each little town has its own law. F. Murray Abraham's Cornelius character even says, like, we've got our own laws here in the museum, our own rules, our own society. And every place they go, you see each place is its tribe with its own rules. Bill Paxton is subject to those because he lives in that world. But Tasker refuses to live in the world as it is. He's clinging to the past, and it's not serving him well.
Yeah. I'm starting to think that maybe he's like serving a system that no longer exists. Like, like
it's pretty much inferenced in the movie that he and his partner are like the very last of the agents who are trying to uphold the law on like this large scale. It's not explicitly stated, but there is an inference to it.
I agree with Mike's point here. I think he likes what he does, and he's finding an excuse to do it.
Yeah.
I don't think he likes the world the way it's turned out, and he likes even less the people who live in it. And the more people he gets to kill, and Belitsky says that for all intents.
I mean, look at it. If he was so devoted to bringing in Byron, would he have really stopped to murder Coltrane and his whole family of smugglers? No. That was an excuse. He's like, we tracked him there. Oh, here's an opportunity to shoot a bunch of people, and I know I'm going to shoot a bunch of people.
Yeah.
In that scene, it's so evident he's going to shoot a bunch of people because, like, I could just die of embarrassment. He's laughing because your thing is like, yes, you will.
Yeah. So let's get to the ending for this character. To me, this is one of those things. If you ask me right now to bet on him being an android, I'd say no, he's just a dude. But it's like there was some elements there in that whole fight scene and the way he goes out. I'm like, why is he so single-minded? why is he saying the same type of sayings that Byron does? Why? There were a whole host of questions that just made me made me go, So
He's the,
I'm not
He's
he's
the
the
sure.
opposite
anti.
of Byron.
Yes, exactly. He's the anti-Byron.
Yeah,
The
because
Antichrist. Yeah.
because Byron is a machine who discovers humanity, and Tasker is a human who has no humanity. He's excised it all from himself.
Well, there's also I
I
I don't
mean, they're
want to put
both
too much importance
incredibly
on.
they're both incredibly educated, but Byron has this sense. He also has a sense of wonder and naivete, even though he's educated and he has all these skills and can do all these things. And Tasker's like that. He's an incredibly skilled individual, but he's corrupt. He
There's
doesn't
There's
have
also the
also
any of
reason
the
versus faith
innocence.
aspect.
Yeah.
There's
I mean,
also reason versus faith because Byron is very much a classically educated type of person, and Tasker is somebody who believes either in the system that he believes he's upholding or in his idea of God.
And it's so weird because like when you initially watch the film and you don't know that Byron's a machine, you think he's an angel. He is
yep,
definitely portrayed as a Christ-like
absolutely,
figure, and
absolutely.
so it's weird. It's the religious zealot pursuing the Messiah.
It goes even further than that because there's symbology in there. Byron is crucified.
Yeah,
It's on a kite, but he's crucified.
he's hung up in the air.
Yeah, in the same position. So I mean, there's a lot of that
but
symbology
but
in
look at
there.
him as a
So,
Messiah. Wherever he goes, he's helping people.
yeah,
He fixes the cataracts in the kid. The decaying aristocratic society in the museum. He is going to save them by
well,
fixing all their machinery because they're in decline. Everywhere he goes, he makes things better.
I was even I even read into one of the scenes that he rolled away the stone and the man came back from the dead, Lazarus.
Yes,
So
yes.
I was
It
like,
was a stone that he had to roll away.
yeah. So I was like, geez,
Yeah, there's no
you're
moss.
Jesus. Yeah. So yeah, it was definitely in there if you looked for it, and so it did add layers to it, and that's why I'm saying it's like,
It didn't hurt that Earth Mary Abraham kind of looked like Jesus in that scene too.
yeah.
He's
So
even wearing like robes and stuff. It feels very, Middle Eastern.
yeah. So I mean, there's a ton of great stuff in this film. Like I said, it just begged so many questions, and it's like I want my questions answered, and it's like I'm greedy that way, But that's a good thing to make those.
Sometimes I'm okay with that because
Yeah.
I do enjoy the discussion. I remember Quentin Tarantino talking about like everybody was like, what's in the briefcase? Is it Marcellus Wallace's soul? He's like, I'll never tell you because I just enjoy seeing what you guys are thinking. Now I know what's in there, but what I think is in there, it doesn't matter. I want to know what you guys think is in there.
Snap
And
This is what
question.
I like about Watchmen as well. There are certain things that you find in it that you only really make sense when you're reading it. Of course, then Zack Snyder had to make all the subtext text. But
Yeah. All right. Snap question real quick then. Completely other movie, but I got to ask. At the end of Inception, did the top fall or did it stay up?
Top is falling.
I think it's falling.
It's starting to
I
wobble.
agree.
It's going down.
I agree. It fell.
I think the kids looking like his kids in the picture, like they haven't aged, is a bit of a red herring just to make you question it. But if it's the dream, the top never wobbles.
You've heard it here. The question is settled. There don't need to talk about it anymore. Cinema Crusaders has spoken. That top fell.
We are the authority.
That was reality.
Resistance is futile.
Let's. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I thought you wanted to talk about whether Hamill is a robot. I'm like you. I don't think he's a robot. There's too much evidence that he's not. He gets knocked out. He bleeds. He's not invincible.
He dies.
Yeah.
He dies.
I mean, Byron walks away from the crash.
And he does it. Yeah.
Which again, like that whole messianic thing, because you keep expecting, all right, well, something's got to take this guy down. Why would somebody make a servant that's so powerful?
Yeah, he's indestructible.
And so he does feel like this prophesied, bringer of life and light and justice.
Yeah.
And so there he is.
He's like the anti-Terminator, It's
Mhm.
like, it's
I think for the contrast to work, Hamill's character needs to be human. I think you just get that from that.
Yeah, I think it was a nice little. Maybe one of the things I think is that when he said that saying, it gave Byron pause for a second because he was like reflecting on similarities or something,
Yeah.
it's something to that extent.
It
But
was it was enough. It was enough to quell his anger and for him to see the human behind the monster.
yeah,
And even in a really nice book ending of their start and their finish, when Byron's reaching up to the wind, Hamill says like, "Oh, he thought the wind was going to save him,"
hmm
and then when Byron goes back to Matt,
ooh,
he goes like, "In the end, he thought I could save him."
yeah, that's crazy. I didn't even think about that, but that is cool. I like that. So yeah, I mean, so there's tons of really good stuff in this movie based on what you're hearing from us. There's lots of great stuff. It's like just wish that they had done some more with the world building, but it is what it
Mhm.
is. It's still an enjoyable movie to take in, and lots of stuff to dig underneath the top layer and find in there all that meaning and stuff. So it's cool that way. Let's talk a little bit about production process. So we've already mentioned this film was obviously shot on a shoestring budget. Um, the thing that I want to mention, I'm going to go around the horn. I'll go to Steve after I talk, and then we'll go to Jeff, and we'll finish up on closing thoughts and stuff. But one of the things that I thought was impressive in this is that even though this was a shoestring budget, they designed a number of different ultralights using different aerodynamic principles, and they actually flew them. So, I mean, that takes some cojones on an independent film project. And I love, like, for instance, the look of Mark Hamill's ultralight, and they cleverly disguised the propeller in the back of it so that it could be,
Mhm.
a jet in the movie. But they used the mono tail, a mono wing at the back instead of a standard tail for an aircraft. And then the look of Bill Paxton's was really cool. There's an actual kite based, or a hang glider based ultralight later on. There's
Yeah.
balloons. There were a number of actual vehicles in there that were really cool. And I love that they took the time to design them, because at this point there would no all of this stuff is shoestring together, and it looked like that. And so it had that Mad Max feel to it, which I loved. So that was the thing that I really wanted to point out that stood out for me. I was really impressed with that. So that said, I want to go to Steve. What did you think about the production of the film? What stood out for you, good or bad? You can go wherever you want to go.
I do like that they seemed like they were using natural settings for at least some of these locations.
hmm
I think that it's one of those things where a lot of times nowadays you use CGI to imagine locations and things like that, and you can definitely tell that a lot of these valleys and canyons and things like that, these are practical locations,
There was
and it
one
shows.
there was one either rear projection moment or CG moment in a canyon that really stood out as not fitting
Yeah.
with the rest of the film. So
Yeah. But I mean, for the most part, they did use practical.
Not
And I
CG.
think
Back then, it would have been a composite shot,
a composite, okay.
yeah, okay, yeah, but
optical
for the most
composite.
part, yeah, for the most part, it's practical, and it works really well. And they did some good practical work on the planes, on the ultralights, and all that came together well. There are some areas where you can kind of tell that they're sets. I mean, clearly with the compound at the end, Marie Abraham's group. You can the way that they kind of designed that is really kind of interesting. And I was actually kind of reminded of like other films, but I can't really remember off the top of my head which ones. But I did like the way that they had kind of set up the libraries and the
Yeah.
all the pictures of the balloons going up and all of these kinds of things that really kind of feel like they took their time in making those things work. I do kind of feel like other areas were not as interesting, particularly like some of the town settings. I mean, they look like very sort of typical post-apocalyptic type of settings,
Yeah.
maybe mixed in with like South America, those kinds of little towns that you sort of see. But I mean, it wasn't anything overly distracting or anything like that. But it's just that you kind of get some things that are like really striking, really well done, and then other things that I'm like, oh, okay, that exists, and they
I
went
think
there.
that's just picking and choosing your battles.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
and they said at the beginning of the movie that the continents moved, so like everything is kind of smushed together and everything. But there is one question I want to ask real quick for both of you, and then I'll kick it over to Jeff. Is that I got the impression that most of these people lived through the convergence, so that the apocalypse is not that far in the past, which was kind of a different
That
type
was
setting.
Because
that was
Mark
my thought as
Hamill,
well.
Mark
Yeah.
Hamill does say that like his partner's asking him something. And he says like everything changed for me after the convergence. So you figure he was at least a child when that happened and his world changed.
Yeah.
Which is probably
Yeah.
something that made him extraordinarily bitter.
Well, it's like
Yeah,
the people who
and I
are
think that's his
living.
entire character comes from that. Like, he's holding on to a system that no longer exists. So yeah, the apocalypse or whatever it was fairly recent.
Yeah, it looks like the people living in the museum. I mean, they're doing night at the museum times 1,000, like, and partying there every night. So
because to be fair, nature. And nature has been skewed. Now nature is driven by wind in this ecology, but nature will reclaim our stuff with incredible speed. Incredible speed. We've had some places that have been decommissioned here where I live, and in less than a year, it's overgrown with weeds and vines, and trees are sprouting up, and you're like, in another 10 years, you won't even know these are buildings. They're just going to look like big green mounds if nobody ever does anything with the property.
Yeah, I've seen some military posts and stuff that are the exact same way. Once they're abandoned, it's like all of a sudden it turns into the wasteland. So it's crazy.
Happens so fast.
Yeah. So Jeff, production value, but I also I want to get you on something else as well, though, because I want your take on the filming of the movie. We'd like to talk about that all the time. Lance isn't here, but maybe this is just me. It probably is just me as an amateur, but the filming didn't look great. The photography in a lot of places, and I don't know if that's me not understanding what's going on, or if they had a limited budget for photography and stuff. So.
You know what? I'm going to say that was fair. I don't know who the cinematographer was or if it was just the director handling all those details. Mm-hmm. And, this is a film from the 80s. It's not remastered, not restored. So it's in 420 resolution. Okay. So it's not great resolution to watch. It's back in the VHS days. So, and it's not unless you're like talking about that remaster Steve was talking about. Thank God there are companies out there that do these restorations so we can see these movies in even better quality than when we first watched them way back in the day. So I look forward to getting a hold of this remaster. But yeah, release the hounds.
He wants a remastered version as well. So
I'll talk about the filming first. I think what's going on here now. They did shoot a lot of the flying stuff on location.
Right.
They filmed in Turkey because the area that they filmed in Turkey is a land that has been altered by wind and earthquakes, which is what they were going for. So they found this wonderful setting with all these canyons and valleys and hills and mountains and all these abandoned structures all over the place. Some great,
Bean hated the original version.
Some great locations, and they use the combination of miniatures on a stick, radio controlled miniatures that were about like quarter scale, as well as full on planes, like Steve said. As a matter of fact, Bill Paxton's plane, the Shadow, was designed, built, and piloted by the guy who made it. So there's that whole thing. And as far as production goes, they said like they wanted to treat that plane like Bill Paxton's like kind of like the outlaw biker. He's free. He travels wherever he wants. So like they wanted that plane to feel a little bit like a Harley. He's flying around on his Harley. I kind of get off the cinematography thing. Yeah, that was kind of the inspiration there. He's even got kind of like the old, somewhere between like the leather and the Vietnam vet jackets. Like this is where a lot of Harley riders came from.
If you're gonna do that, you got to smoke a cigar and call everyone a bastard. So
So it's got that going on. And since I'm on the plane, I'll get to Mark Hamill's plane. Mark Hamill's plane is an observational vehicle. if you're a bounty hunter, you want to be able to look left, right, up, down, all these different ways. It's called an optica, and they modified it very slightly and gave it the nice, scary black paint job, and it looks like this flying predatory insect throughout the movie.
It's
And
cool.
great visual design going into all this stuff. But as for the filming, I noticed that the director at one point, a little thing I was looking into, he said like the natural settings, you do what you can, but like when you get to build the sets, you have more control over everything. So I do question a few of his choices because there are times he went for very harsh lighting.
Yes.
As opposed to like the 3 point kind of lighting, he went for like really serious or single directional lighting with high contrast shadows on the other side. And so there were times it would muddy things. Unfortunately, sometimes things would pop into the background. And then when you're doing scenes that require smoke and dust and other particulates to fly around in the air, it looks good. It fills out a set, but sometimes that can also detract if it's a little too much, or depending on what kind of film stock you're using, what kind of lenses you're using. All of this makes a difference. Your f-stops, all this sort of thing. So it's not the best shot film ever. There are visual elements I definitely like very much, but there are other times I just wonder if I guess they couldn't hire a cinematographer, or maybe the director thought he had it, or maybe it was just that cost cutting measure. You do what you can do. But as far as production, I'll get back into that now.
Okay.
So, like I said, they made the excursion out to Turkey to shoot all these great flying shots, and this location looked exactly like the world they wanted to create. And then even some of the places that like look kind of janky, Steve, were actually, once you get into some behind the scenes, were actually pretty cool sets. They had 30-foot tall polystyrene rocks on
Yeah.
wheels,
Cool.
so they could make these artificial natural sets and move them around. Now, what can be kind of funny about that is sometimes if you bump into a rock that's just styrofoam, you might accidentally shift it out of the way. So there's a few reshoots here and there, but I did appreciate the fact that this is a guy again coming off of Star Wars. He was there when they built Dagobah in an airplane hangar. They made like a 200 trees in a swamp in a set, and they had to paint all these things and put leaves on them and all kinds of craziness.
Let's see. Mike asked, "What did you like about the shots?"
Now there are definitely some iconic shots that I did like. Again, some of the shots I really wish the angle had been better. Like I had to watch it behind the scenes to understand, like when Matt's friend is riding by his plane, and I think maybe this is something that makes you wonder if like Mark Hamill's a robot, because he gets hit with a plane wing
Yeah.
and he just takes it, but the angle's bad. If you look at it from a different angle, he kicks the wing off because it's an ultralight. They're just barely held together, and like, oh, he didn't just take this to the gut. He actually, boom, stomp kicked it off the plane. And that made a lot more sense. So that's a bad shot. But there are a lot of other shots that I really liked. I love, one of my favorite sequences in the whole film is, in fact, the crucifixion in the sky. I thought that was incredibly well done.
Yeah, that was cool.
And the climactic shots at the end. I love the whole Fred Astaire sequence in the museum. That was wonderfully done. With a nice, close up on the feet, close up here, like wide out here, like to see them dancing. Peck worked very hard on his dancing for that film, and the climax gave me such a nice Western feel when you have this long shot of Byron advancing on the plane, and then like Mark Hamill's grabbing his various guns, and he's like, "Oh, this isn't working." But like he's just coming at him Terminator style, and like I can just feel this tension building from the way that's shot and edited together. So there's definitely sequences I like that I thought were well shot, but sometimes it's just a little bit bolo. Like you said, there's this one composite shot where they're flying through the canyons, and I don't like that shot at all. It's an obvious optical composite. I wish they could have just flown a radio controlled plane or a real airplane through some canyons for that. But they didn't. You know, it is what it is. And not everything's perfect if you don't have like a $300 million for your movies these days.
Yeah, I mean, I think they were trying to go for a cool glam shot,
They,
and
yeah,
it just didn't come off.
you know, it's he was clearly taking as many lessons as he possibly could have learned from Lucas in working on Star Wars. Uh, but it seems like they just didn't have the same level of skill as Lucas because he managed to get a lot more bang for his buck. And Star Wars was not a high budget movie. They just made it work.
Yep. Awesome. All right, let's wrap this up with some final thoughts on the film. I'm gonna go, back to you, Jeff. So, final thoughts on Slipstream for our whole audience. So,
Oh, final thoughts.
and Mike says you're not going to beat ILM. Yeah, probably.
No,
Especially at this time. So,
definitely not. By this time, by 1982, they were doing Return of the Jedi. They had perfected their craft.
yeah, this is 1989. So, I mean, they've done a ton of movies at this point. They are the gold standard at this point.
Yeah,
so.
it's like watching Peter Jackson, do the Weta Workshop, and like they became the gold standard for a number of years as well.
Yeah. So.
So, final thoughts on the film. Like, this is one of those films that is so curious to me. It engages me, and when I first started watching it, because I haven't watched this in a very, very long time, it was one of those things where I started off watching. It was like, was my nostalgia better than the film? Did I like it more than I thought I did? And I think I'm getting the Steve effect. It's like, oh, I don't really like these characters so much. What's going on? Like, is the rose-colored glasses? And then as the film deepens, I remember exactly why I like this film so much, because I do like these deeply philosophical films, especially if they're in a context that isn't mundane. I enjoy them in the context of sci-fi or horror or fantasy or anything interesting like that, like a time travel romance like Somewhere in Time. I find that incredibly fascinating, and I am not a fan of romance films, but that's a romance film I will watch again and again and again. So this whole idea of what makes a man, what makes a monster, holding on to the past versus forging a future, the dynamics between the characters, first with Beliski and Tasker, and then her and Matt Owens, and watching that relationship form, even though you're like, there's no way in hell, she's so out of your league. And of course, watching the evolution of Byron's character and the friendship that forms, and the possibility of an impossible romance of some sort, and it's all just so good. It's better than its flaws.
Yes, and it's got that independent heart to it,
Mm-hmm.
which is endearing, because the flaws, a lot of them have to do with the fact that it's not a big budget movie, but because it's not a big budget movie, it does a lot of stuff that you would never get in a big budget movie, which are great. So,
And I gotta say, I really am just a fan of these stories, these humanistic stories. What makes us human? Whether it's this, whether it's the struggles that Data goes through on Star Trek, whether it's films like Ex Machina. Is she alive? Is she not alive? Like, I'm always a sucker for this sort of thing. I find the human condition just that compelling.
cool, very cool. Steve, final thoughts on the film?
I think there's a great movie that is trying to make its way out from underneath the dross of it. I think there are definite elements that are kind of holding it back, and a lot of them are technical, and a lot of them are budgetary. So and I'm not going to say that's necessarily the fault of the movie. I'm not necessarily, or the director. I'm not saying that they did a bad job on everything, but I think it's very, very clear that this is a movie that wants to be better than it is, and that's why you like it. In the end, it just takes a while to get there. It takes a while to see, okay, why do these characters matter? Oh yeah, because this is somebody who's a robot who is trying to find his humanity. You have his best friend who starts off as a self-interested rogue, and then kind of realizes, yeah, I'm gonna spend my time with this dude because he's my friend. Even though he's a robot, there's that unlikely friendship, and that's great. And all these other things, you want to know what's going on with this world. I mean, just the very idea, I mean, of a post-apocalyptic future, where the conceit is basically that everything is driven by these massive winds. I think I mean, there's just so many interesting things that could come out of that,
Mhm.
and interesting locations and things like this, and you don't quite see them to their potential, but what you see there makes you want to find out more, and it sticks with you after. And I think that that's really kind of the strength of this movie.
Absolutely. I will say that this is a film that if you are a fan of science fiction, if you're a fan of these actors, if you're a fan of independent cinema, it's a really cool movie to watch. If you're going to go in there with the idea that I want to go look for a big blockbuster film with all of the bells and whistles, then you're not gonna like it. You're not gonna like it. I'm just going to say that right there. But if you're going to go in and say, I want to look at the world that they've created and what they are offering me and take a glimpse for a moment, you're going to get a lot out of it. And you're going to be, and I will say, you will probably also be left with, man, I wish they had done more with this, or they'd given me more meat on the bone. But that's a good thing to have. That's a good thing to have. So I'm glad we covered this film. I enjoyed it. I liked it quite a bit. I wish they had gone back to it, or I wish I could read a novelization of it. I also want to try and find that remastered version with those scenes that are missing, because I definitely agree with Jeff. There were moments where the cut was bad because it was like, it's obvious there was a scene left out for whatever reason.
Yeah, because
a lot of jump cuts in it as well.
I very much remember those scenes being in there.
Yeah,
yeah, just like me, man.
Yeah. So I would say this was a cool movie to watch. It was cool to see the birth of Mark Hamill in the next phase of his career. It was cool to see the different cameos. There's a lot of really cool things in this. And then Bill Paxton with long hair, man, that was freaky. So, so that was cool as well. I want to thank my fellow Cinema Crusaders so much for being on here with me. Thank you so much, Steve.
Yeah, always glad to be here. I mean, it's been a rough week, as we've talked about early in the show, but it's talking about things like these and getting into what we really love about them that makes the world a little brighter for me. And I appreciate it.
No problem. And we love to be here for you. I wish we all lived closer and could do more, but this is the least we can do. Thank you so much, Jeff.
It was my pleasure. I tell you, I love the movies that we share amongst each other, because even the cinemaphile I am, sometimes you guys bring some stuff on me. It's like, oh, I haven't gotten around to seeing that, or I'd never seen it before. Or rarely there's even things I hadn't heard of before, which is always exciting. But more than that, I love sharing these wonderful pieces of cinema that are, especially people who are much younger than us, have no idea about, and they're very much worth revisiting and seeing what has gone on before versus what's going on now, because I just don't feel like we're really in a golden age of entertainment at the moment. And there's things out there, and don't get me wrong, I think we can get to another golden age of movie making. I love what Hollywood produces when Hollywood's at its best, but when it's not, it's kind of like your comic book collection. If you're not reading, the comics that are being weird right now, you go back to your long boxes and dig out those back issues and those trades, and you enjoy them. So I'm happy to be able to share stuff, and I hope that these films will be able to gather a new audience and maintain that cult status, because there's some good stuff out there that deserves more eyeballs on it.
Absolutely. And I will say, when we come to sharing movies, I will let you, the audience, and my fellow Crusaders know our next movie, because I'm the next one up that's going to pick a movie. So I am going to stick with that independent vibe. That is the first thing I'll say. So that's a little clue to all of you out there.
Nice.
It is a movie that is more The Running Man than the Running Man movie was. That's your next clue for the film. It is a film whose tagline was, you cannot run, you cannot hide, you cannot refuse to play.
I know what's going to be.
It is an example of just how far people will shamelessly go for fame, and also a harsh critique of reality TV. I'm talking about the independent film Series 7, The
Yes.
Contenders from 2001. We will be covering that one next, where you get the gun, have gun, we'll play. That is how it works. So we will be covering that movie. We look forward to talking to you next Friday for Cinema Crusaders, when we are going to be covering Series 7. Until then, keep that popcorn warm, get back into that comfy chair, and enjoy some movies this weekend. We're out of here, everybody. You have a great one. Bye.